Thank you very much, Mrs Reardon. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this morning, and I'm pleased to see the Minister here. I'm not quite sure whether this is his valedictory performance as Minister for Work, and I did see some pictures of him going into Downing Street, and if he has been promoted to Secretary of State for Justice, I would like to be the first to congratulate him, and also remind him that in that post he will of course have responsibility for the Tribunal Service, who deal with the appeals relating to work capability assessment, so he won't completely escape responsibility for some of the issues we wanted to raise this morning. I'm very conscious, Mrs Reardon, of the number of people present during this debate. I think that does highlight that whilst we may be consumed by events going on in and around Downing Street today, there are very many people in the outside world who are very concerned about aspects of the work capability assessment and employment support allowance, and I'm sure there are many people here who wish to seek to reflect those. In mind of that, I will endeavour to be brief, and I will, I'm afraid, only take a few interventions so I can get to the end of my remarks to give more people the opportunity to make their contributions. Because I think what I wanted to do was start with making 3 points, which I think we probably all agree with. Firstly, the benefits of work. I have seen many of my constituents, and it's harder now than it was a few years ago, but who have managed to get into work after long periods, not being in work after long periods of unemployment, and as well as any material benefits, the beneficial impact on the health and well-being is obvious. So we should all be seeking to encourage as many people as possible into work and to get back into work if they've been out of work for a period of time. Secondly, I think that most of us also acknowledge and accept that sometimes helping and supporting people who haven't been in work for a long time is a difficult and time-consuming process, and it needs to be done sensitively to help people and not feel as though they're being punished. And thirdly, I think probably, although not everybody completely accepts this point, I think very many people do accept that there is a benefit and an appropriateness in having an assessment for those who rely on sickness and disability benefits. And that was the purpose behind ESA, as envisaged, to support those who can into work, but also to support those who sadly will not ever be able to work again. 6 months ago, I was fortunate enough to initiate a debate in this chamber on this issue. At that time, the Minister confidently predicted that the performance and the situation would massively improve from that time, and that some of the changes that have been made hadn't yet fed through. Now, 6 months later, I will put it to the Minister that the presence of the number of people here today indicates there are still very, very real concerns and problems, and I'm sure many of those will be reflected during the course of this debate. On that date, my contribution focused a great deal on specific experiences of my constituents undergoing the assessment, who've undergone the assessment. I told the story of a constituent trapped in a system of assessment, successful appeal, reassessment, and then another successful appeal, and another reassessment. For too many people, that remains the experience across the country. And that's something which I think the Minister and whoever his successor is needs to look at very carefully addressing. I've spoken with very many constituents who would love to go out to work, but it's not just not possible because they suffer from a disability or chronic condition. And those are the people that many members here, I'm sure, will wish to speak up for today. However, what I wanted to do this morning is focus on some of the issues around the contract and the performance of the contract undertaken by... I will.
I'm very and would like to congratulate him on securing the debate on a matter of vital public concern. He spoke of his own constituents. Paul Turner, in my constituency, a manager and a proud family man, contracted a serious heart disease, was off work, desperate to work, couldn't work, but told he was fit for work, and was denied benefit. As his wife says, he went into serious decline and died but weeks later. Does this not demonstrate, because in the assessment his heart was not tested, how fundamentally flawed the assessment process is and its conduct by Atos? And does he agree with me? It's absolutely wrong that a case like this, the Minister should have refused to refer it to the serious case review so profound lessons can be learnt. Never again is anyone treated like Mr. Turner was treated.
I think my honourable friend makes his point very powerfully, and there are a number of cases that I'm sure can be cited which indicate some of the lack of comprehensive nature of the assessment process and the failure sometimes to undertake to incorporate other evidence that would help ensure that people are not wrongly assessed, or not as many people aren't as wrongly assessed as they have been. And I think he makes that point very, very well. As I said, I wanted to concentrate on some of the contractual issues this morning, and other people, I'm sure, will, as my honourable friend has just done, will make comments about individual cases that illustrate the points. The work capability assessment must be tailored to act in the interests of both the individual and the taxpayer. Unfortunately, at the moment, both are getting a raw deal from the current system. Whilst, and I'm sure that someone will jump up to say, is it true to say that the work capability assessment was introduced under the last government, and that's a point which members from the government side frequently make. It is also the case that in late 2010, the contract with Atos Healthcare was amended and extended to 2015 beyond its original conclusion date of 2012. The work capability assessment was rolled out to millions of people on incapacity benefit under this government, despite pilot projects in Aberdeen and Burnley highlighting some of the serious concerns that there were. And the Minister did say during the last debate, and I'll paraphrase him slightly, but that it was his judgment that that the government should get on with that process and try to work on the basis of the expert reviews as it was going on, rather than fix it in the first place.
Right to point out that the work capability assessment has been around for many years, and for many years I've been helping a constituent of mine, Mr. Robert Schaefer, who I think was a victim of a poor assessment in the past. But is he as concerned as me that Atos has as their Chief Medical Officer Professor Michael O'Donnell, who was previously employed as Chief Medical Officer by the American insurance company Unum, which were described by the Insurance Commissioner for California, Mr. John Garamendo, as an outlaw company who've operated in an unlawful fashion for many years, running claims denial factories. Is this the kind of person that the government should be allowing to be in charge of a work capability assessment system?
Tom Greatrix.
Well, I think my friend makes an important point around the organisation the company contracted to undertake this work on behalf of the DWP, and there are some points I'll make slightly later on about some other concerns in relation to Atos Healthcare that I think are legitimate and do need to be addressed. Because in many respects, when the cost of the appeals have more than doubled in 2 years, from 25 million in 2009-10 to 60 million in 2011-12, Atos Healthcare's performance has been, in many ways, extraordinarily poor.
A point of appeals. Doesn't the fact that nearly 40% of the people who are unsuccessful initially then appeal and are successful demonstrate that there's a fundamental flaw in the whole worker capability assessment process?
Tom Greatrix.
I think the level of appeals and the level of successful appeals indicates that the many decisions, I mean, no process is going to be 100% all of the time, but many of those decisions are wrong decisions, and they need to be corrected through the tribunal service. But don't anyone forget that can take 6 to 9 months to get through the process because of the backlog of appeals, and during all of that time, people are suffering severe anxiety and concern about their fate. So I think my honourable friend makes a very important. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
This is an issue which is affecting all of us and all of our constituencies, and the whole test is deeply flawed. Does he agree with me that a short-term piece of advice that we can give to our constituents is that when they are undergoing this test, they could actually request to have it videoed, which would at least assist with the further appeals. And it's just been pointed out just how much the appeals are actually costing the taxpayer. So the government is paying twice over for what is essentially a flawed capacity assessment.
Yeah. Tom Greatrix.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for her intervention. I'm not aware of what the Atos will say to people who seek to video their assessment, because I know there have been cases that have been highlighted to me where people have have asked to have their assessments recorded, and in the last debate the Minister said that if anyone wanted to have their assessment recorded they could have. That's not been the case in many experiences, and people are being refused permission to record it themselves. So I'll be interested to hear the Minister's response to that particular point. I'll give way.
Very grateful to my honourable friend. He's being very generous. And can I say he's hit on a really important point about the interface between the appeal problems and Atos's work as well. And isn't it true there's this weird revolving door now, whereby people get an assessment, they question it, they then wait ages for the appeal, they may win the appeal, they may not, but by the time the appeal comes up, they've had another assessment, and therefore they go through a revolving door of losing benefits. And there's something fundamentally wrong and unfair here.
I think my honourable friend touches on a very important point, and when I raised this with the Minister at recent DWP questions, he did indicate that now finally some of the information coming back from the Tribunal Service will go to DWP decision makers so they're better informed. I'll make this point now for the Minister hopefully to be able to respond that I am aware that since July that started to happen. The status of those report backs, what impacts they will have in terms of calling people for further assessments, and particularly when I've seen that some tribunals now have a section at the end of that information which suggests that this particular applicant shouldn't be reassessed within 12 months or 24 months. Is that something which the DWP are taking into account and appreciating before they call people back? Because my honourable friend is exactly right. There are many, many cases of people caught in this process, which isn't any good for their health, isn't any good for the taxpayer, because we end up paying again and again over a period of time. Mrs. Rudden, I will take one more intervention. I apologise to everybody else because I do want to leave time for other people to make a contribution, so I'll give way to my honourable friend.
On the point of recording assessments, recently I had a constituent who was told that they could record the assessment, but only if they paid for a private independent company to come in. Obviously, this is someone who is living on benefits and can't afford that. I'd written to the Minister at the time about this issue. I wonder if the Minister, in his closing remarks, can address the recording of assessments.
I thank my honourable friend, and she's addressed the point, made the point which I hope the Minister will be able to respond to. Mr. Rynn, I will attempt to move on. Back in February of this year, I wrote to the National Audit Office to outline concerns about the contract between Atos Healthcare and the DWP, centring on two issues. First, as I've referred to, the lack of efficiency in the use of public funds, and second, a lack of accountability inherent in the disbursement of those public funds. As the recent House of Commons Library note has confirmed, many of the figures which I've received as answers to parliamentary questions over the course of the last 18 months or so, and as my honourable friend reflected earlier, 41% of those found fit for work appeal the decision, and 38% have their appeal upheld. For those who seek the advice and support of professional advocacy groups such as Citizens Advice, the appeal success rate is closer to 70%, and just last week Kent's largest CAB indicated an appeal success rate of 95%. The impact of this is twofold. First, too many sick and disabled people are being found fit for work when they aren't. They become entangled in a lengthy appeal process that, as I said, can occupy up to 9 months of their time. In many cases, even when the appeal is successful, the individual is placed in the work-related activity group, and then they have to begin the whole process anew. I'm afraid I won't, because I do need to make some progress. I apologise to my honourable friend. The second aspect of the high appeal success rate is the cost. The cost to the public purse from appeals to WCA was £60 million for 2011-12. As I said before, more than doubled since 2009-10. That is almost 50% of the total yearly value of the government contract with Atos Healthcare to carry out the assessment in the first place. Effectively, taxpayers are paying for this process to not work and then to correct it again. Given the unprecedented pressures on the public purse at the moment, it beggars belief the government is apparently content to sit back and do very little to rectify this situation. In his oral evidence to the Work and Pension Select Committee in June 2011, the Minister claimed that if the migration of those on incapacity benefit to ESA was successful, it would save money. He said, "The aim is not a savings measure, it is not a financially based exercise, although clearly if we succeed, it will save money." The Minister appeared to accept that an indicator of success was saving money. Does he therefore accept that the significant increase in costs associated with the number of decisions that are being appealed and successfully appealed indicate that on that measure the government has failed? One measure that I and many others have been questioning is the imposition of financial penalties on Atos Healthcare to compensate for poor performance. In February of this year, in response to a written question on whether he considered imposing such sanctions, the Minister appeared to absolve Atos of the blame for the number of decisions overturned on appeal by saying it would be inappropriate to impose financial penalties on Atos to reflect the number of work capability assessments which are overturned on appeal. I tried again in July, asking for a note of when penalties had been imposed and what the total value of those was. This time, rather than absolve Atos of blame, he decided to protect the company's commercial interests. The Minister replied with the frequent defence of commercial sensitivity as a reason for withholding this information. I find it difficult to understand where the commercial sensitivity comes into play when we're talking about a single company being paid from the public purse to carry out an exclusively public function on behalf of a government department. Transparency about that information would help to ensure that there can be confidence in the system if the performance is being properly managed, and highlight where the performance isn't being properly managed. And that's an issue which I think it's important that the Minister seeks to address. Because it wasn't until the NAO responded to me last month that some light was shed on this issue. The NAO said, and I quote, "We do not consider the current contractual targets are sufficiently challenging, and in our view, this allows the contractor to deliver a significant number of assessments before financial penalties become due." The NAO went on to say, "Our review has concluded the Department has not sought adequate financial redress for contractor underperformance." One of the most concerning revelations from the NAO was that in just 10% of cases where financial penalties could have been imposed did the government do so. This is astonishing. For a government and a minister who quite frequently makes comment about the importance of value for money for the taxpayer, with which in some respects I agree, it beggars belief that when there are opportunities to put this into practice, the government has only done so in one in 10 cases. In times of tight budgets, we need to make sure the money we do spend is better spent. If we don't, we are failing disabled people and their families. Those are the words of the Prime Minister in 2009 at a conference on autism. In that same speech, the Leader of the Opposition cited a National Audit Office report which looked at value for taxpayer money in relation to autism. I'm sure even in his elevated state today, the irony is not lost on the Minister. There are many questions the Minister must answer to account for the failure to properly manage the contract with Atos Healthcare. Why did he impose financial penalties on only 10% of the occasions when they could have been triggered? What was the total value of compensation clawed back from Atos Healthcare to reflect that poor performance, and what was this as a percentage of the cost to the public purse for the original contract and appeals? Does he agree with the NAO that current targets which trigger financial penalties aren't sufficiently challenging? What are the key performance indicators that the NAO described as insufficiently challenging? This, in particular, is an important issue. On a number of occasions, I have attempted to seek clarity on what is expected of Atos in relation to customer service, the number of assessments conducted, the number of people found fit for work, targets, norms, statistical norms, and many other issues. The Minister has refused to be fully transparent on this matter, releasing a very limited excerpt from the Medical Services Agreement with Atos, which relates only to waiting times. As I said before, that maximum transparency is important in enabling people here to hold the government properly to account, to hold Atos Healthcare through the Department of Work and Pensions properly to account for the work that they are undertaking in a very important area. The National Audit Office was also scathing about the government's failure to properly monitor the performance of Atos. According to the NAO, limited routine validation of information provided by Atos Healthcare, and they went on to recommend the Department develop processes to validate key performance information supplied by Atos Healthcare. Back in February, the Minister stated in the last debate on this issue with a certain degree of confidence that on capacity issues, as we stand here today, the incapacity benefit reassessment is on time. New claims for ESA have fallen a bit behind, mainly because of the introduction of the personalised statement. We discovered in the first few weeks it took healthcare professionals longer to complete the statement than expected, so the number of completed assessments dropped. That has changed. They have caught up again, and we are chasing through to clear the backlog, as we are doing with the appeals backlog. Unfortunately, the evidence doesn't bear out that assessment. The target waiting time from when the ESA 50 form is issued to a claimant to when Atos Healthcare completes the work capability assessment and hands the case back to the DWP is 35 working days, 7 actual weeks. For the period September 2009 to August 2010, this target was met with a clearance rate of 33 days. Yet in the space of less than 2 years, not only has the target not been met by an astonishing margin, but the length of time sick and disabled people have to wait for their assessment has risen by 85% to 61 working days or more than 12 full weeks. There are more than 20,000 people waiting more than 13 weeks for a work capability assessment. The reason given by the Minister was, and I quote again for the record, Atos Healthcare's ability to deliver a service within the actual average clearance target was also impacted by the service volumes for this period, which were significantly above the departmental forecasts. In addition, Atos had recruitment demands / challenges. These issues have resulted in an increase in the AACT. This is Atos Healthcare, who receive more than £110 million a year to deliver a contract, who are unable to meet their recruitment needs to deliver it properly. That, at its very best, is an example of underperformance, which the government should be ensuring there are financial penalties against Atos Healthcare for that level of failure. Because that level of contractual failure feeds directly into the experiences that I'm sure we'll hear about in the remainder of this debate from many, many people across the whole of the country who have found themselves in a position where they are waiting for an excessive amount of time for their assessment. They're under pressure, they feel as though they're being hounded, and then they may well wait a significant period of time for an appeal to follow it. There is a degree of chaos in the system caused by the decisions of the government and the failure to hold Atos properly to account. And it's not the first time that Atos's recruitment challenges have been highlighted as a reason for failure. In December 2011, the Minister advised that a key Harrington recommendation would not be implemented beyond the pilot stage because of Atos capacity pressures. So that's twice in less than a year the government has blamed the failure of Atos to recruit enough staff as the reason for why those undergoing the work capability assessment are being shortchanged. Which begs the question, if the government is content to blame Atos, why has the Minister spectacularly failed to do anything about it? Why, on one hand, in his written question answers, does the Minister lambast Atos when waiting times increase, yet sit on his hands when it comes to making the company pay financially for its underperformance? In 2010, the average WCA customer journey was 36 working days. This rose to 44 working days for the first half of 2011 and increased further still to 53 working days in the second half of 2011. 2012 brought more misery for ESA claimants. Between January and May of this year, the average customer journey increased to 64 working days, or just under 13 weeks. The Minister inherited 36 working days and has transformed that into 64, an increase of 78%. This may seem as though I'm talking about the dry detail of contractual issues, but the failure, the defects at the heart of this process, the failure of the management of the DWP, the failure of delivery of Atos, we can see that reflected in the experiences of many, many people who we seek to represent. Before finishing, I wanted to say a few words about the award of the £400 million contract for the personal independence payment to Atos Healthcare in many parts of the UK. One of the further criticisms of the National Audit Office's review, which interestingly enough was dated the same day as the announcement of the PIP Framework Agreement, was about medical services contracting. The NAO stated specifically in relation to the PIP procurement process that, and I quote, "Our review of existing arrangements concluded that the Department needed to make changes to secure effective leverage over future medical services contracts. We have recommended the Department focus on reducing the barriers for new suppliers to making a sustainable entry to the medical services market, in particular addressing the current risk that a single incumbent supplier has significant cost advantage which makes delivery of a level playing field more challenging." The NAO went on to lament the DWP's dependence on a sole national supplier, which has, again quoting, "limited opportunities for routine assessment of value for money, for exercising contractual leverage and for wider market development." As I'm sure many other members present, representing a constituency within the areas, the majority of the areas for which Atos Healthcare will undertake the PIP assessment process, I received a letter from Atos Healthcare confirming that they'd been successful in this contract, with the chilling phrase that they won their contract on the basis of their record of delivery in delivering assessments for the government over a period of years. Now, I'm not making this as I'm making this as a serious point because it is vitally important that as the PIP process is established, that some of the issues which have been encountered in the WCA aren't just reflected again. And there is an increasing risk, I think, an increasing concern that that will be exactly the case given the chosen contractor. In conclusion, Mrs Reardon, the contractual arrangements, the performance measures, the penalty clauses, the monitoring, the delivery failures, as I say, are technical, dry and dull, and especially when they're contrasted with sometimes the very heartbreaking and tragic cases that I've heard about, not just from my own constituents, but from many people who have contacted me in the lead-up to this debate. But many of those experiences are because of the flawed delivery of the work capability assessment and the record of Atos Healthcare. Whoever the Minister for Work is tomorrow morning, or tomorrow afternoon, we need a process that works in the interests of the taxpayers and the individual claimants and applicants. A process that is comprehensive enough to encompass complex conditions, that recognises there are progressive and incurable conditions, and it is a waste of time and money to keep reassessing people with those conditions, that recognises the fluctuating nature of many other conditions, that there are good days and bad days, that appreciates the very difficult challenges in assessing mental health needs, that takes into account expert medical evidence much more fully than is done at the moment, particularly in some of those cases that we've already heard about, that does not make blanket assumptions about the time it takes to recover from very serious illnesses such as cancer and impose blanket conditions as a result, that helps people who can work and doesn't hound those who can't.
Order, order. With the permission of the Chair of Ways and Means, and because of the number of speakers wishing to speak today, I'm going to limit the amount of time to 3 minutes per speech. And when you hear the bell, you've 1 minute left. May I also remind members that interventions should be short, and remind those in the gallery that they should listen in silence and not interrupt the debate. Duncan Hames.
Thank you, Mrs Reardon. Given the number of people wishing to speak, I'm very happy to forego this opportunity, and whilst I thank you for recognising me, I'll prefer to listen to the other speakers who are clearly keen to take part.
Mark Lazarevic.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will take the opportunity of speaking, but I will try and be brief for the same reasons as the honourable gentleman has just given a number of members who wanted to speak in the debate. I do want to congratulate my honourable friend for securing this debate, but more importantly, for the work that he has done over, I think, almost a year now in highlighting the problems of Atos and the problems of the work capability assessment. Like many members, I came along to the debate today with a dossier of cases in my constituency of people who had suffered from the process, not just a process involving Atos, let's be clear. It's not just Atos that is the issue here. It's the way the system is being operated, it's the way that the system is being put into effect, and the way that Atos is being asked to carry out its work as well. There are certainly major deficiencies in the organisation, but it's certainly not just a question of Atos which we need to be concerned about with. I want to make, given the time, just a few points. Firstly, the experience of going through the work capability assessment process is one that many applicants find terrifying. There's plenty of evidence, particularly in the case of those with mental health issues, but it does not take account of the particular circumstances that they suffer from, which can, of course, vary from day to day, from time to time, as my friend has made clear. Inevitably, any process like this under any system is going to lead to some stress and tension for many people. But what makes it worse is the way that a process is felt by many applicants to be one that takes away from their dignity as a human being, does not lead to proper consideration of their personal circumstances, and is believed, notwithstanding what the government says and what the contract says, is one of the methods used to keep down the costs of benefits. And I know that is not any sense in the policy or the contract, but in the climate of opinion where there is a feeling the government is trying to drive down costs at all expenses, it's inevitable that there will be that feeling from many of those who apply for indeed any kind of benefit. What is certainly the case, that those subjective feelings are borne out by the high rate of successful appeals. As honourable members have pointed out, that there are a large number of successful appeals, and indeed it must surely be concluded but with such a high rate of successful appeals, there are probably people who don't even appeal, don't even apply for benefit, who would have been successful if they had or were indeed entitled to the benefits of which they have not applied or have not appealed against a refusal. What is essential, of course, is that the process is got right first time round. That is partly the responsibility of Atos. It's all the responsibility of government. What needs to happen is to ensure that all available evidence is used at the earliest possible stage in the process. We all have cases of people where the medical evidence, the GP consultants is overwhelming, and yet their appeals or applications are unsuccessful, and it's only at appeal that they are then given the right decision. It's also important, of course, to reduce the unnecessary reassessments which are carried out in cases where it's overwhelmingly obvious that a reassessment should not be carried out. And again, I'd like to know what the Minister is doing on that. Now that there is a backlog in the appeal process, it's obviously important that appeal process, that backlog, is dealt with as soon as possible. And I'll leave, therefore, this final comment to the Minister. He may be leaving this post today, but I hope that he will, and make this point quite seriously, in his new role, make it sure that the backlog of appeals is dealt with speedily. That's important for the individual applicants, it's important for the system, and until that backlog is dealt with, we will not get out of this vicious circle where there are new applications put in just at the end of the appeal process, and the whole process starts again. That's bad for the applicant, it's bad for the system as well, and I think needs to be a priority for the Minister to address in his new role.
Katie Clark.
I'm delighted to get the opportunity to contribute to this debate because it is an issue which many constituents have contacted me about over the last few weeks. Over a number of years now, we've had many constituents who've got in touch with my constituency office with concerns about Atos, but I think the publicity there's been over recent weeks has meant that many people who now are not directly connected with the process are aware of the problems that are taking place. I would ask that the Minister listen not to what's just said today, but also to the concerns that have been raised over a very lengthy period of time, and I congratulate my honourable friend for securing this debate and indeed all the work that he's done on this issue. Because it's not just members of Parliament who are expressing concern. All of the organisations that are involved in this process, whether it's representing claimants, organisations such as Mind, or whether it's the professionals involved in the process, the PCS trade union or the British Medical Association, they are all expressing concerns and taking the view that this process is fundamentally flawed. And I would ask the Minister also to recognise the anger there is that Atos are sponsoring the Paralympics. I think many people do feel that that is an insult to the people going through this process. A year or more ago, many of the constituents who were contacting my constituency office were doing so about new employment support allowance claims. And the problems seem to be coming largely from the Atos medical assessments. And as has been said before in this room, almost invariably constituents who get in touch with their members of Parliament are successful either at the initial reconsideration stage or the appeal stage. And I think as a constituency member of Parliament, when we have a constituent who approaches us and when it seems to us that what they're saying is credible, invariably that person is successful at appeal. Now, however, there has been a change, and the new constituents that are getting in touch are mostly with the kind of constituents where they are transferring from incapacity benefit and they're now being put on the work-related activity scheme, which basically means that they only get contributions-based benefit for 1 year rather than the permanent help they would get if they were put in the support group. This is quite different than previously. Apart from the financial implications of being mean tested after a year, it means reassessments, attending interviews and the requirement to look for a job. And I think most of us are very aware of many constituents who are in extremely difficult medical situations where this is causing a huge amount of stress to them. So I would ask the Minister to listen to what's said today and to make serious changes to the current position.
Jim Shannon.
I will congratulate the honourable member for bringing this matter to the House today. It's an issue that affects us all as MPs, and the fact that are now, with benefits changing as they are and will change more in the future, the impact upon our constituents is greater than ever. I want to focus upon one thing because I'm very conscious of the time. I want to give an example of how the Atos system doesn't work when it comes to basic knowledge of the interaction between the applicant who is appealing their decision to refuse their incapacity benefit or ESA and those who are wheelchair bound and have severe mobility problems. They're asked to attend a building, an appeal in a building in the centre of town. That appeal takes place on the 3rd floor. The first question the receptionist will ask, can you leave this building here on your own if there was a fire? A very important question to ask anyone, of course, and the fact is, no, they couldn't. So, therefore, they have been asked to attend an appeal tribunal. The appeal tribunal cannot now take place, and they go home. They join the back of the queue once again, and they fall into this system of waiting maybe an hour 6 months, or perhaps an hour 8 months. They're then asked to attend an appeal which takes place some 45 minutes to 60 minutes away in a car. If you're driving slowly or driving fast, it doesn't matter because the traffic's still there. And the fact is that they then have to go through the pain and all those problems to try and get to where they want to be. We have very, very clear problems about basic knowledge of the scheme. Now, whenever you, as an elected representative, make a complaint about that and to the relevant bodies, whether it be Atos or the minister that's responsible for it in Northern Ireland, and you make sure, and they take it on board, and they seem to be responding, that's great because you think you've won the battle for your constituent and for the future for what the system means. But it doesn't work that way, because guess what happens the next time? Somebody else in a wheelchair finds themselves in the same problem. Somebody else with severe mobility problems finds himself in the same problem. So I want to illustrate that example, Mrs. Reardon, if I can, because I feel that we have a system that has failed my constituents on a regular basis, continually, again and again and again. And there has to be a grassroots change in how that system works for it to happen. And that's what the honourable gentleman is saying in relation to it, and that's what we all believe, and that's why we're all here today as well. I can also say that, and I'm very conscious of the time, that there are many, many people who fall in this category, where they presume that if you're not able to walk, you can sit, therefore you can do a job. That's very unfair for many people because of the back problems they have and the severe mobility problems they have. Can neither stand or sit on a regular basis. So I'm very, very conscious, Mrs. Reardon, of the issues, and I want to put those forward. And I'm hoping that the minister can reply in a very positive way. We need change, or we need accountability, either one or the other, or indeed both. Thank you.
Anne Begg.
And congratulations to my colleague from Rutherglen and Hamilton for securing this very important debate. And I have to say this is my first time speaking since my rather extended absence, so it's a good subject.
Could I, on behalf of everybody in this room and in the House, welcome her back, say that we're delighted to see her in such good shape. We were very sad about the difficulties in the long period of recovery she had to go through, but she's very welcome back in this House.
And I thank the Minister for being that gracious. He may not be quite so gracious by the time he's there. I don't think the government has grasped how disastrous the ESA assessment system is. It's not something that can be fixed by a few tweaks here and there, and we tried that with the Harrington review, but from what you've heard already here today and the dispatches and panorama programmes, which were actually filmed in June of this year, suggest that not much has changed. And the people complaining are not just the usual suspects. They're not just the radical crips, the work shy, those who want money without being assessed. These are ordinary people, most of whom have worked hard all their lives until their sky fell in and they lost their job because of an illness or an acquired disability. It is not enough for government to say that the genuine claimant has nothing to fear. They are the genuine claimant. In too many cases, they are scoring no points in the initial assessment. There is something fundamentally wrong with the system and the contract Atos is delivering. When the BMA votes at their conference that the WCA is not first fit for purpose, there is something wrong with the system. When GPs are reporting an increased workload, not just in providing reports, but from patients whose condition has worsened as a result of their WCA experience, there is something wrong with the system. When my constituent who has lost his job because he has motor neuron disease scores 0 on his WCA and found fully fit for work, there is something wrong with the system. And when that same constituent appears in front of a tribunal and in less than 5 minutes is awarded 15 points, there is something wrong with the system. When people with rapidly progressive illnesses are not automatically put in the support group, there's something wrong with the system. When some people would rather do without the money to which they are absolutely entitled rather than submit to the stress of a WCA, there is something wrong with the system. And when someone with a severe illness has to fight for a year through an appeal to get the correct benefit, only to be called in almost immediately for another assessment, there is something wrong with the system. And then the recall and the assessment all happens the following year and the following year. There is something wrong with the system. And when people feel this persecuted, there is something wrong with the system. And then to top it all, they lose their contributory ESA after only a year if they're in the RAG group. When up to 40% of appeals are successful and there's no penalty for the company carrying out the assessments, there is something wrong with the contract. When so many appeals result in an award of ESA support group when original assessment was no points, there is something wrong with the contract. When there is no penalty for a high percentage of wrong decisions, there is something wrong with the contract. When there is no incentive for assessors to get the assessment correct first time, there is something wrong with the contract. It is time for the government to act because there is something fundamentally wrong with this whole system.
Jonathan Reynolds.
Thank you, Mrs Riordan, and I'm pleased to be called in this debate, and can I congratulate my honourable friend on securing the debate and for giving what I thought was a superb speech. I wish to briefly speak to add my voice to those concerned about the operation of the work capability assessment by Atos, and to highlight some specific concerns I have in relation to people with autism. First of all, can I say I accept that in the UK we have a problem with the number of people who are not in the labour market due to illness or disability. I asked the Library for a comparative analysis of these levels across the EU, and whilst it's obviously very hard to make that analysis given the differences in scope and eligibility and recording of information, the European Labour Force Survey does clearly show the UK has a much higher proportion of our population aged 20 to 64 outside of the workforce due to illness or disability. It's 6.1% for the UK against an average of 4.3% for the rest of the EU. And I think we know why this is, because to me, from the Thatcher government onwards, people were put on incapacity benefit rolls to hide the true scale of unemployment. There are people who were dumped on there in the 1980s who have been there ever since. That's why I have no problem with the principle of a medical assessment, otherwise the government can too easily push people to inappropriate benefits in order to massage the unemployment figures. And equally, I have no problem with there being 3 classifications: fit for work, unfit for work, and with the possibility of work, but not in the short term because they have been outside of the labour market for so long. But my concerns and objections relate to the way the government is allowing Atos to conduct the test. Like other colleagues here, my observations are heavily based on the experiences of constituents who have directly come to see me. It cannot be sensible, prudent or fair to have a test where 40% of the appeals against decisions are successful. It's a waste of money and it causes unnecessary distress. The government need to hold Atos to account for an assessment that clearly isn't working as it should be. It isn't coping with the complexity of the cases that are seen, and it is clearly struggling with complex conditions, particularly those with less visible symptoms. Some specific problems are particularly evident. The RNIB have reported that the descriptors against which blind and partially sighted people can score points are primarily those based on navigation and communication, with no account taken of other barriers that blind and partially sighted people might face in obtaining work. For people with autism, which is an interest of mine as one of the vice chairs of the APPG on autism, and I'll remind the House of my existing declarations of interest in relation to my son, this form of face-to-face assessment can often be extremely problematic. People with autism face problems with communication that other people would not see evidently. They may misunderstand questions asked, find it hard to answer questions, and fail to pick up on inference and assumption. For example, the question, can you travel to work on a bus? They may say yes, but without explaining that's only with being able to use one bus route, or with the planned help of a support worker, or providing that the bus isn't late, or even a different colour than usual, or that no other factors have occurred. In addition, the testing of some people is clearly too frequent. I have a constituent with a degenerative disease who passed one assessment but failed another one within a year. As his condition was degenerative, it is surely medically impossible that he could have got better. It does not make sense. At the extreme end, I've heard accounts of people in the support group being tested again after as little as 3 months. And the worry this causes is exacerbated by the freak results an assessment can produce. I have another constituent, Mrs Riordan, who was deemed fit to work despite having a broken back. The government needs to take away the feedback that is coming in from across the country about the very real problems and concerns that the current operation of the WCA is having. And crucially, they must start holding private companies with important government contracts to account when they don't deliver for the taxpayer. Thousands of people's quality of life depends on getting this right, and it will soon be even more the case given that Atos has won the contract for the Personal Independence Payment Assessment. Please, can we not get into the usual party political rhetoric and stereotypes that tend to mark all of the welfare debates in this House, and focus on meaningful changes that will improve a lot of people's lives?
Nick Du Bois.
Thank you, Mrs. Reardon. A very small contribution to make to this debate. Like I'm sure all MPs, we watch closely and listen carefully to charities, as I do in my constituency, and I meet regularly with them. And I'm always looking to handle cases of constituencies where there may appear to be apparent odd decisions that I'm uncomfortable with. I will always pursue, like any good MP would, I'm sure, if they feel the system is not working quite correctly. But I really rose today just to make a point that in all my time and in all my dealings, I've never lost sight of the fact that I think what is fundamentally driving the WCA is that we are really asking what people can do and encouraging and helping people who have been ignored by the system to actually seek what they can do and not what they cannot do. And I think that's a premise that many people will agree with in this chamber. However, I will turn specifically to the statistics, because if we listen just to the statistics, I think it is easy to get a distorted picture. Now, it is recorded that 55% of new claimants who have been found fit for work, it is a good thing. And there is no question that I accept appeal levels do appear at first hand to sound somewhat high. When we hear that 40% of those who are found fit for work appeal, we have to remember that it's actually 38% of those who have a decision overturned. And putting that in perspective, of all of the claimants, we are talking about overall a 15% fit for work decisions being overturned. Now, I'm not saying that that is satisfactory. I'm not saying that that is necessarily a good thing. But I'm determined to make the point. I will give way, yes.
Help people who can work, that we need to look at providing a much more flexible work opportunity, because the problem is, at the moment, there are permanent job opportunities, but there's nothing flexible working from home for those who've got mental problems, which would help to achieve what the government wants. And secondly, that to make the system work better, the people who really will never be able to work again with very serious blind problems, mental health problems, to save taxpayers' money, ought to be in exclusion category where they don't get reviewed.
Yep. And the point that I'm trying to make is, I think that my honourable friend is absolutely right. The point that I'm trying to argue is that if we stick to the headline statistics, we start to get into exactly what the honourable gentleman said before me, is that we get into a banter about a debate that dwells on statistics, and I am keen that we actually dig down. If we're going to do that debate on statistics, we dig down and actually analyse them correctly before we make sweeping judgments to them. So I am also pleased and recognise that the government, with the specialists, occupational therapists, Professor Harrington, have not just sat back since coming into power and not reviewed the process that is going on. They have twice reviewed it, and Professor Harrington has been asked to review it a third time. And that is right. But it should not deter us from the overriding principle, which the honourable gentleman who introduced this debate said, it is right that where we can, we should encourage and help people back to work for those who can work, for after all, they were not assessed for a long time, and it would be wrong to ignore many of those who have and will continue to return back to work.
Order, order. Can I just remind members and those in the galleries that other members must be heard. Alison Seebeck.
I thank my honourable friend for securing this debate, which, quite frankly, hasn't come a moment too soon for many of my constituents. The principle that people should be supported into employment when they can work is the right principle. The problem is that this system isn't achieving that, and it's causing, quite frankly, untold grief and serious concern to very, very many vulnerable people. There are a number of issues. I'm going to ask quickly the Minister to explain why we're still seeing confusion between ESA and JSA. I've had cases brought to my attention where constituents are being passed back and forth between the two, and both departments feeling that theirs isn't the right benefit for that individual. A constituent was claiming JSA, notified by a hospital she had to have an operation on her wrist. She was then told by the job centre advisor to claim ESA instead, as nobody would employ her for 5 or 6 weeks. She was then refused ESA because she scored no points and left in total limbo with no money. That's not acceptable. Now, that was a relatively short period of time. Some of my constituents have had to wait up to 18 months for a tribunal decision, and when seeking updates on progress, one was told no update was available because there was nobody in the area to hear her case. On other benefits that people are entitled to are also then not applied to that individual. So I had an individual who applied for cold weather payments and was told because her position hadn't been resolved, she couldn't claim those. Bad weather, she might have frozen to death in the meantime while a decision's being reached. To come back to claim handling, there are just so many incidents of poor claim handling by Atos. I'm sure everybody in this room has tens of them. A constituent recently came off a contribution-based ESA. He was assessed by an Atos nurse who advised him he needed a wheelchair, but at the same time she assessed him as no points. Another constituent had a major cancer operation. GP said, currently in a wheelchair, not fit to travel. Took 3 goes to get a home visit for that particular person. Eventually she was given a wheelchair, received DLA, had home adaptations, and then Atos said they wanted to see her, insisted she came. If she didn't come, she was threatened that she'd have her money stopped and she had to cancel a hospital appointment to do that. That isn't acceptable. Minister, could you please look at having independent assessments considered at the front of the process, not at the back of the process? You would save untold appeals, I'm sure, in doing that in due course, and untold misery, quite frankly, to my constituents, who just feel, particularly those with multiple issues, including mental health issues, that their cases are not fully understood by the medical advisors who are being asked to assess them. I think at the moment this government should be ashamed of the slump in performance that we're seeing from Atos, which was highlighted by my honourable friend, and the impact it's having on disabled people, and particularly my constituents, is utterly unacceptable.
Hugh Francis. Sorry.
Wrong Howell. I'd like to congratulate the member for Rutherglen as well on securing this debate, because there can hardly be an MP who hasn't had a case with Atos and with work capability assessment, and we are only a very small sample in this room of the people who have had to work with this system. From my own casework, the faults with the system fall into clear categories. Briefly, with the form of assessment, insufficient information, and this is a particular problem for decision makers trying to take reasonable decisions. Not enough information, lost information, information disregarded. Persistent complaints, of course, as Atos are working to targets for failing people. The continual reassessment of people. And something that happened to me a couple of weeks ago, a missed appointment. A constituent of mine stayed in all day. The doctor didn't turn up. I turned up as well, by the way, and wasted a couple of hours of my own time. The doctor didn't turn up. My constituent won't complain because he's scared of complaining, because he doesn't want the attentions of the Atos doctor again. Thank you very much indeed. On the content of assessments, well, we've already heard that it's a small, short snapshot. It's unsubtle, it's ticking boxes, and doesn't work well with intermittent conditions. And there are questions, I think, about the competence of Atos staff. For example, to assess mental illness. But in another case of mine recently, apparently the doctor involved wasn't allowed to work with patients by the medical authorities apart from undertaking Atos assessments. He was allowed to make Atos assessments but no other form of medical intervention. There has been some improvements, I concede, specifically since the start of the Harrington reviews. But if we look at the nature of the mistakes that the system makes, it's interesting, I think, For example, I was told by my local CAB that since April they have lodged 62 appeals. They've won 3, they've lost 2, and the rest are still pending. And that is a very common experience, I think, for all MPs. Incidentally, as a Welsh MP, I would note that I have been told that appeals in Welsh, Minister, are taking longer, and I would like some response on that particular issue. I think ASOS should be put into special measures. They should be reporting very frequently, monthly perhaps, on the number of cases, the percentage, which lead to appeal and which lead to a change in the decision, the percentage and number of revolving door appeals, I think. But I think, most importantly, for the public debate, I think we should have some qualitative information about people's experiences, and I think that that would influence the public debate on disability and benefits in a way which would be very positive, given the current climate, which has been fostered, I'm afraid, by some newspapers, some commentators, and I'm afraid by the policy of this government.
John MacDonald.
I met constituents yesterday who've gone through the system. They call themselves the victims of Atos, and they asked, I promised them I'd just set out very briefly what they described as their experience. On the assessment, as exactly has been said, they're often met by an assessor who has no expertise or specialist knowledge of their condition. It's a tick-box exercise. They completely agree with the BMA on that. Despite the Harrington recommendations for improvements, the test bears no relationship to the real-world challenges faced by people with disabilities. There's no recognition of fluctuation in conditions, as has been said, particularly mental health, and it ignores largely the assessment by their own GPs and the advice. But also, it even ignores some of previous Atos assessments. I've just got a constituent who the Royal Mail employed and used Atos to assess them for whether they're capable for work. Atos assessed them as not capable. They were retired, but then applied for benefits, went through an Atos assessment and was told that they were capable of the same type of work to be re-employed. The fly-on-the-wall exposés by the television programmes has exposed the pressure that's been exerted on assessors to make sure that they fail people in the assessment. If people are assessed as capable of working correctly, they are then harassed on a regular basis with challenges that they are unable to cope with and therefore lose their benefit as a result. Then if they do succeed on the assessment after assessment takes place, again, reassessments, harassed by reassessments. With the appeals, we've heard the statistics on the appeals, but most of my constituents have to wait 6 months before they get an appeal, and longer. And those ones that have support, and I represent people now at appeals. Those that get support, we win. But there's a lack of support because of cutbacks in local government and support for advice centres and government cutbacks as well. So many are not. The result? Well, to be frank, financial hardship. People are living in poverty because they're losing their benefits. In addition to that, there's the emotional stress, the breakdowns, and as Mind has pointed out in their briefing today, self-harm and, yes, we know, suicides as a result of that. Why is the government defending this company, but also why is it now awarding it the PIP process as well? I also share the concerns of many disability groups about the disgust that we have that Atos has been allowed to sponsor the Olympics. It is an absolute disgrace. I support DPAC, the Disabled People Against the Cuts, and Black Triangle, who've organised the protests against the sponsorship by Atos. And I'm calling for an inquiry into the violence against people with disabilities who protested last week at the DWP and elsewhere. I tabled an EDM a few months ago calling for the Atos to have its contract withdrawn for a new system to be established. 103 honourable members have signed that early day motion. Surely after that and this debate and debate after debate, the protests that are going on in the streets themselves, the government now must reassess the role of Atos and establish the new system that my honourable friend has actually suggested should be based upon reputable criteria and also should be based upon fair and equitable criteria.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. To be frank, there's more people standing than we'll have time for in the debate. The opposition spokesman has said that he requires 8 minutes. I suspect, because of interventions and so on, you would want the Minister to have slightly longer than that. So I propose to call the wind-ups just after 5 past. So we've probably got time for 2 more. I've got a list here given to me by the previous chairman, and I will go in order of the list that she's given me. Yvonne Favag.
Congratulate my honourable friend for calling this debate. I think it's worth reminding people that actually we talked about statistics. Behind these statistics are people, and these people have been wrongly denied the money they need to live on and the support they need. Like many members, I have innumerable cases here. I would like to turn to the recording issue. I have a constituent who came to me who wanted his Atos assessment recording because he had heard of problems in the past. He was told there were 10 working recording equipments for 140 centres, and it would have to attend for his assessment and it wouldn't be able to be recorded, which is, I believe, his right. And recording might have helped the constituent who came to me who had been suffering from depression and anxiety. And she had an assessment where she was assessed as, well, she doesn't cook. She doesn't cook because, in fact, she hasn't got a cooker because her lack of concentration means she is unsafe. She could barely communicate with me, and yet the Atos assessment said her communication was good. And she'd forgotten to mention that she lives with her sister at the assessment and had to be reminded by her mother that that was there. That was never mentioned in the assessment. These clients are appealing, and they're appealing with the help of advice agencies. But when legal aid goes in 2013, I fear that we will see a drop in the number of appeals going forward. And this drop won't be due to the fact that Atos have got it right first time. They'll be due to the fact that people have nowhere else to go to get their appeal heard. They will be living without the benefit to which they're entitled. And aside from that, Atos need to particularly request medical evidence. Medical evidence costs money. I've seen doctors' reports of anything from £35 to £200. If people are eligible for legal aid, they can get those reports paid for if they go to an advice agency. What will happen when that system stops? And lastly, in the short time that we have in this debate, I would like clarification on the compulsory reconsideration phase, which is going to come in from April 2013. Will claimants still receive ESA during this period? And that's absolutely vital. As we've already heard, 35% of appeals are successful. That means that these people are not fit for work. The decision was wrong. And if they're not fit for work, they can't meet the work search requirements. Therefore, it's essential that the ESA considers during this period. And I would like to get some clarification on that for all the groups. Thank you.
If there are no interventions, we can have 2 more speakers, and then I'm afraid we'll have to go to the front benches, and they will be, on the list provided to me, Julie Hilling and then Bill Esterson. Julie Hilling.
Thank you very much. I'm so grateful to have been called in this, and I want to congratulate my honourable friend for this important debate, because there's no doubt that Atos work capability assessments are not working. And when campaign groups have adopted the slogan, Atos kills for profit, something is deeply, deeply, deeply wrong. Any organisation that's proved wrong on 40% of its decisions is failing. And it certainly came as a real surprise to all of us when Atos were given the contract for PIP. And of course, we want to help disabled people who are able to into work. But removing benefit from those who cannot work is heartless, it's cruel, and it's just plain wrong. Assessments should take notice of medical reports, whether from GPs or from specialists. They should take notice of prognosis and treatment programmes, and must take better account of fluctuating conditions and mental health issues. And I want to add 2 questions to the Minister. How many people have died between being rejected for ESA and their appeal? And how many people have actually committed suicide? Because, and with time being short, I just want to give a couple of examples. Aaron came to me last week. He was injured in a bomb blast in Afghanistan in 2009. The explosion broke virtually every bone in his body, and he suffered a crushed leg injury. And despite immediate medical care, his injuries resulted in a partial leg amputation below the knee in 2010. And he's had a number of other surgical procedures. He originally received DLA, but after his army discharge, his benefit was stopped. He was reassessed for benefit in November 11 and was told that as his walking had improved, he would not now get benefit. This was a bit of a surprise to him because he's still struggling with a transition to a prosthetic leg, as his stump is regularly infected. He has required other surgical procedures and is still waiting for another operation this autumn. There's a second question that relates to Aaron. Not only has he been failed by the DWP, but what about the Prime Minister's assurances earlier in the summer, where he guaranteed welfare support for ex-servicemen and women injured in military conflict? I was also visited by the mother of somebody that I'll call Tony. Tony lives alone and is struggling to have as normal a life as possible, despite the world appearing to be very difficult for him. She was desperately worried about him, as he just scored 0 in his Atos assessment, despite the fact that he is bipolar, has obsessive-compulsive disorder and has Asperger's. Now, Tony really wanted to work and has tried a number of jobs, and I'll just tell you about one. He tried a job as a postman, but because of his OCD, he could never get out of the door. He'd sort the letters by address, then he'd have to resort them by size, then he'd have to resort them by colour. And although he was supported by a number of employers, he actually found unable to work, and at the end, he actually had a breakdown and ended up in hospital. His consultant has said that he can't work. His family is now terrified about his suicide risk.
Over 40 people have approached me with their cases of being denied WCA or fear of it happening to them. And the member who mentioned the fear, the culture of fear amongst that group of people, was absolutely right. A number have described that they are afraid to appeal because their experience, or the experience of people they know with Atos members of staff, has been so terrifying that they are scared themselves to proceed with the appeal. And that is the reason some appeals don't take place. That is artificially depressing the level of appeals. But I want to describe a small number of those 40 cases. One was a lady who had a serious operation following cancer. What operation isn't serious following cancer? It took her over a year to get her backdated pay after her claim was denied. A second case, 4 months for a decision to be overturned after having ESA rejected after heart bypass surgery. And I'll talk in some detail. Colleagues have mentioned the work-related activity group. I'll describe what happened to my constituent, George Mullen. Mr. Mullen had one leg amputated at the age of 18 after an accident as an apprentice joiner. Despite this, he continued to work for over 35 years full-time. At the time, he was told by a solicitor he'd be a fool to try to get back to work, but he ended up as a successful clerk for a small business. This was despite considerable pain. To aid his mobility for work, he didn't use a wheelchair, but got about either on a false leg or on crutches. He suffered with chronic infections and abscesses at the amputation site and developed arthritis in his neck, shoulders, back and the knee and foot of his remaining leg. In spite of all this, he continued to work until he was told he was being retired on health grounds, because there was absolutely no way his health would allow him to continue performing his job. He is on 24-hour blood pressure monitoring because stress pushes his blood pressure to a dangerously high level. Mr. Mullen applied for ESA as an absolute last resort. The questions he was asked when he attended with his wife included: are you married? How did you travel here? How long have you been married? There wasn't one question about his physical or mental condition. No physical examination at all was carried out. Mr. Mullen insists he tried to offer information about his condition but was ignored. Mr. Mullen was placed in the work-related activity group. At no point was it explained that this was only for a year and it was means tested, and that if he felt he ought to be in the support group, he had to appeal within a month. It came as a complete shock to have his ESA stopped when the year was up. He has applied again. He awaits assessment. He has had to attend counselling because it has caused so much stress. No explanations. In the work activity group, it stops after a year. Mr. Hollerborn, that is the reality that faces the real people who are affected by this. This is not about figures, as somebody said earlier. This is about real people, vulnerable people, at-risk people in our society.
Stephen Timms.
My honourable friend for securing this debate on a matter of huge importance to hundreds of thousands of people, and also for the work that he's done in highlighting the problems people are facing. I'd want to give the Minister my hearty congratulations on his appointment as Secretary of State for Justice. Thank him as well for turning up for this final discharge, this final responsibility in his old job. And I'm also very pleased my right honourable friend, the member for Stirling, is in her place. This is an issue that she and I have had a close interest in for a long time, and it was the last government that introduced the work capability assessment and employment and support allowance in order to provide support for people currently out of work for health reasons, but who are able to plan for a return to work. But the current government, Mr. Hoppenbone, chose to take a drastic shortcut, curtailing the bedding down period for the new benefit and rolling out the assessment without improvement, even though by that stage improvements had been identified and proposed, and severe problems now are the predictable result. And ministers are simply failing in their task of managing the contract with Atos, ensuring that people who claim ESA are treated as they should be, and reviewing and reforming the test so that it works as it should. The test does need major improvement. 2 of Professor Malcolm Harrington's reviews have reported so far. As we've heard, the member for Enfield was right. The government says it's accepted most of its recommendations, but it simply hasn't implemented them. And that, I believe, is the heart of the problem. One simple example showing the muddle the Minister has got himself into has already been raised a number of times in the debate. The Year 1 Harrington review recommended that Atos pilot audio recording of work capability assessments. There was a pilot of 500 claimants that followed. Atos said they thought it was a good idea, but we've heard from my honourable friend, member for Makerfield, for Stoke-on-Trent North, for Airdrie and Shotts, what has happened in practice. In a debate, the debate that my honourable friend secured earlier in the year, as he reminded us, the Minister told us that he made a commitment. We will offer everyone who wants the opportunity to have their session recorded, but he has not delivered on that pledge. And it turns out the problem is a shortage of tape recorders. And I was contacted by somebody who struggled for weeks to get her assessment recorded. Eventually, Atos wrote to her she couldn't have a recording or a rescheduled appointment. I wrote to the Minister about this and reminded him of the commitment that he'd made, and he said, well, no, we think it would be unreasonable to delay the assessment indefinitely for this purpose. Well, that wasn't the commitment that he gave to this House in February. It is a mess. It is a shambles, and I'm afraid that it says all we need to know about the Minister's management of this process. The government needs to get a grip on Atos. And I wish him great success in his new job, but I do wish he'd put a bit more effort into this aspect of his old one. We've also had a series of mishaps. For example, his rather farcical efforts to suppress a YouTube video giving advice to people who were claiming against their work capability assessment. It turned out that the subversives responsible for this pernicious video were his colleagues at the Ministry of Justice. And so it's gone on. But probably most harmful to the credibility of the work capability assessment has been his delay in making the changes needed so the test can work. Professor Harrington's first review in 2010 asked Mind, MENCAP and the National Autistic Society to propose better descriptors for people with mental health conditions. They produced recommendations in November 2010. Professor Harrington commended them to the department in April 2011. Further recommendations went to the department in November 2011, specifically about changes, and we've heard about this issue as well, to the descriptors for fluctuating conditions. The work capability assessment must not be a snapshot. I will give way, yes.
James. Some of the announcements being made, including, for example, having mental health champions, has not been rolled out into assessment centres, and also that Atos has still been inconsistent in allowing support workers or friends to go in to assist people, especially with mental health illnesses, when they go into assessments.
Stephen James.
I do agree that commitments that have been made, and he's given us a couple of good examples, have not been delivered. But the work capability assessment must not be a snapshot of people's conditions on the day they attend the assessment. By definition, it's likely to be a good day, otherwise they wouldn't be able to show up. It needs to take account of the frequency with which people can do work-related tasks and the frequency as well with which they suffer the ill effects of their condition. Now, the alternative descriptors proposed do just that. They are now in the public domain, thanks to the Grassroots Disability blog, without which we wouldn't have known what they were, and they do look like a real step in the right direction. Now, the department has now had those mental health descriptors recommended for 17 months. the fluctuating conditions description for 9 months, hardly any progress has been made at all in that time. And indeed, in a written answer on the 25th of June to me, the Minister told me this, and I quote, "We've been carefully considering how to build an appropriate evidence base around the proposed new descriptors. Terms of reference have been agreed. We aim to publish a report of the evidence-based review in the spring of 2013. Now, Mr Hollowbone, his successor, urgently does need to get a grip on this and to get a move on. If that slightly ambiguous deadline in that written answer is even met, and that would be a first, it'll be 2 years since he received expert guidance on how to improve the assessment for people with mental health conditions, and a year since he received the other recommendation. I'll give away one more time. Yeah.
And McKeegan.
Would you agree with me that if you suffer from cancer, but the type of cancer that you have does not require chemotherapy, you should still be deemed to be not capable of working if you're currently in treatment? Why has the government not changed that indicator, which they could do, frankly, immediately?
Timms.
My friend raises a very good point, and indeed we had debates about this in the debate around the Welfare Reform Bill, and my understanding was that the government had committed to make precisely the change that my honourable friend has suggested was necessary. It appears that that hasn't been done. But Mr Hollowman, I just want to ask the Minister for two things in particular. First, on this point about recording assessments, which may appear a rather minor issue, but it's absolutely right, I think, that a number of contributors to this debate have raised it. Will he stand by the commitment he made here in Westminster Hall in February that people who want recordings will be able to have them, instead of reneging on that commitment, as he seems to have done in the letter written for him and written for him by officials, but signed by him to me about the case that I raised with him? And secondly, will he get these new descriptors evaluated now very quickly, urge his successor to get a move on, do it transparently, and make the changes fast when that evaluation is complete?
Well, Mr Hollowbone, first of all, a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I know this is an issue of great concern to many members. It was always going to be an issue of great concern to many members. This is a long and difficult process. I totally accept that. I've always said that in this chamber and in this House. I'm not going to be able to respond to every individual point. One or two honourable members have raised individual constituency cases. If they write to the department, I will certainly ensure that the department addresses specific questions. But I would make one point, I think, in relation to the comment made by the Honourable Gentleman of Hayes and Harrington, the case that he raised. Because what he did was drive to the absolute heart of what we are trying to achieve. And this is an ambition that I believe was and is shared by both the opposition and the government. I believe that if people can make a return to work, even if it is a different form of work to the work they did before the health issue that they have arose, I believe they are better off than they are.
Order. 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 Right. Order. Order. The parliamentary rules are that there is to be no noise at all from the gallery. If you persist, madam, in carrying on talking and shouting, I will have no choice but to suspend the sitting and clear the gallery. This is your last chance. If there's any more noise from the gallery, I'll have no choice but to suspend the sitting so no one will hear from the Minister and clear the gallery. Minister.
It is, Mr Hollowbone, our view that if people can make a return to work, even if it is a different form of work to what they're able to do before their health condition arose, that is better for them than spending the rest of their life on benefits. That is the principle that we are working to. I will briefly, I'll give away once, but that's all.
Helen Goodman.
Well, if the Minister actually read the current descriptors, could he explain to the House what kind of work a person could do for whom engagement in social contact with someone unfamiliar to the claimant is always precluded due to difficulty relating to others. Reduced awareness of everyday hazards means they pose significant risk of injury to themselves or others, and that they are at risk of loss of control, leading to extensive evacuation of their bowel or bladder. What work can these people do?
Minister.
Well, let me pick this up straight on. First of all, let's be clear. We are talking about a system. It's all well and good for all members opposite to stand and rail about the system. This is a system that was created 4 years ago by them when they were in government. And it's a system that we have consistently tried to improve. And let's be absolutely clear. I want to put on record, this is not a financial exercise. There are no targets attached to the reassessment of people on incapacity benefit. And the assessment that is in place for new claimants for employment and support allowance is the assessment.
If there's any more noise from the public gallery, I'm afraid under the rules of Parliament I have no choice but to suspend the sitting and clear the gallery. I understand that people are very concerned about this issue. My constituents are as well. But under the rules, I will have to clear the gallery. That's the last time I'm going to say it. If there's any more noise, I'm afraid I will have to suspend the sitting. Minister.
I think it's really important to emphasise that this is an exercise. The reassessment of people on incapacity benefit is not a financial exercise. There are no financial targets attached to it. It is about finding the right number of people who can make a return to work. It is not an exact science. It never was. It never could be. But it is all about trying to help people back into the workplace if they possibly can do. And that was the motivation of the previous government when it established the work capability assessment. When we took office, we put in place the changes that they themselves have put into the pipeline through the internal review of the work capability assessment. But I fully accepted when we took office that the whole process needed to be improved. And that's why we brought in Malcolm Harrington, and that is why, and I'm absolutely clear about this, we have implemented Malcolm Harrington's recommendations, and I will talk about the issue of recording. And Malcolm Harrington has all along, because I've met him regularly, I've talked to him regularly, at no point has he said to me, this is not a process that is fit for purpose. At no point has our independent advisor, who has the confidence, I believe, of most people in the charitable sector who are doing this, at no point has he said to me, this is not a system that has to stop, this is not a system that is unfit for purpose. He has made suggestions about improvements. We have followed his advice in doing that. Our objective in all of this is to do the right thing. But of course, this isn't an exact science. We will never create a system that is perfect. That is why people have a right to appeal. That is why...
I thank my friend. I'll be very, very quick. Since the improvements that the government has brought in that have been substantial, would my honourable friend agree that the numbers of people who have been moved into the support sector of the ESA has increased by 20% since the improvements have come in?
Well, it is
Minister.
a matter of record that since we have implemented changes as a result of the Harrington process and as a result of the internal review we inherited from the previous government, the number of people, including the number of people who have mental health conditions, going to the support group has increased. And I think that is a good thing. I'm pleased that we made those changes. The issue of cancer was raised. It's taken longer than I expected because of various issues that we had in terms of the discussions we've had with Macmillan Cancer Relief, but I believe that we are now in the right place. I'm absolutely clear we'll be making a formal announcement very shortly, but I have said before that I believe we should extend to oral chemotherapy the access to the support group that is offered to people who are receiving intravenous chemotherapy. Very quickly, and this is really the last intervention.
Stephen Timms.
I am grateful to the Minister. He will, though, acknowledge that the new descriptors that have been proposed for mental health conditions and fluctuating conditions are nowhere near yet being implemented. When does he expect that they will be?
I want to make just one point, and then I will answer that question. The other point I think it's really important to put on the record. Atos do not take decisions. Atos, in no circumstance, take a decision about whether somebody receives a benefit or do not. The process that a claimant goes through is that they will be asked to fill in a form that comes to Atos to consider whether they should be put to an assessment or not, or whether they should be passported straight through to the benefit. Atos carry out the assessment, but the decision about benefits is taken by a decision maker in the Department for Work and Pensions in Job Centre Plus. It is really important that people understand that. Atos do not take decisions. And when we talk about Atos, we are talking about a team of maybe 1,500 healthcare professionals, many of whom are trained in the NHS, who've been recruited to do this, who are carrying out an assessment that was designed by the Department for Work and Pensions under the previous government, has been continued under the current government. Atos do not take the decisions themselves. And we have gone out of our way as a result of the Harrington recommendations to ask people much more directly. They receive phone calls now rather than letters, asking them to bring forward additional evidence. And the question was asked about the mandatory reconsideration phase. Effectively, it already happens. Every case where the person comes back and says, I'm not happy, will now get a reconsideration within Job Centre Plus. I'm keen that we have that second opinion, because we won't always get it right, and I want us to try and see if we can bring forward further evidence that enables us to take the right decision before it ever gets to the Tribunal Service. Effort is being put in to make that happen. Now, the Right Honourable Gentleman asked the question about two things. First of all, he asked about recordings. Let's be clear, the results of the Harrington recommendation. Harrington recommended we did a pilot. Actually, I was personally keen that we just did it. He said to me, actually, it may not work. So I really think you should pilot it. It may actually prove to have a negative effect. And we tested it, and we found actually little enthusiasm amongst people going through the assessments for to have it recorded. And in the end, the conclusion was we should make it available on a voluntary basis, but it's not something we should do across the board. It's not something I rule out. So if there was overwhelming evidence to say that it was necessary to do, I would make it available. But at the moment, let me just give some statistics. There are currently 300 claimants waiting for an audio-recorded assessment. Atos is conducting 8,000 assessments a week. We are ordering additional audio recording machines so that people can have the assessment recorded if they want. They are perfectly entitled to bring their own recording equipment as long as it can record 2 copies, because they need to be able to take one with them and leave one behind. And that's what makes it. And that's why we have to buy what is fairly expensive equipment ourselves, and we've ordered additional equipment because there has been an increase in demand in the last few weeks. I'm perfectly relaxed about having recorded assessments. I'm perfectly happy to make available recording facilities. The advice I had from Malcolm Harrington was test it, and the result of that pilot was actually, not only was not a need, but many people felt uncomfortable sitting there with the tape recorder running. Now, the other point he made, the descriptors, the new descriptors which were brought forward by the charities. He's out of date. Actually, the charities have been working with us for the last few weeks on the assessment project of the package they brought forward. The work was finished last week. They actually wanted more time to work with us because it is a complicated process. We're trying to mesh together mental health issues, fluctuating conditions. And as I said in this very chamber about 12 months ago, the problem I had with the recommendations they brought forward in the first place is that they didn't come forward simply with adjustments to the existing descriptors. They came forward with a comprehensive reorganisation of the whole assessment that would have involved a redesign of physical descriptors as well, a project that the Honourable Gentleman, Right Honourable Gentleman, having done these projects in the DWP, will know well would be a 2 or 3 year project. We've tried to take some of the suggestions they brought forward and embed them into elements such as the ESA 50 form that people fill in, and we are now working with the charities to road test all of this to see if it really does make a difference. But I'm not going to embark upon a major overhaul of the whole exercise based on a set of recommendations that are not evidence-backed without us having tested them in the way that the previous government tested, by putting real cases against proposed descriptors and making a comparison between the outcomes of the theoretical new descriptors and the old descriptors. That work is on track. It's continuing at the moment. We're actually pushing the charities to make progress because I want to get it done, and we're still on track to complete the gold standard review in the spring. Now, the Honourable Gentleman made reference to the NAO report. I have the benefit of having read the NAO report. I know that he hasn't. And the reality is that it highlights a number of what I regard as not particularly major areas of improvement. Actually, if you read the report, it reflects a big, complicated contract. It makes some suggestions for improvement. It is not as he portrays it. And, of course, the key point, when he talks about the performance of Atos over the last 2 years, he has to remember is that the recommendations that Malcolm Harrington brought forward, combined with some fluctuation in volumes coming through to Atos, which is something that's certainly beyond their control, has caused significant operational difficulties. And I can give him my word, I have sat in meetings with them, I have put them under intense pressure, they have brought in extra capacity, cost, we have made sure that we deliver at every stage. But you can't just take a subcontractor, change the goalpost totally and expect them to take it on the chin with no consequences. We have seen some consequences from the introduction of the Harrington recommendations, particularly the personalised statement, but as we stand here today, we're on track to close the backlog time to where it should be later this autumn. The numbers he gave are already well out of date. And in terms of the number of appeals, we have brought down the backlog in the number of appeals that we inherited 2 years ago. But it's a big task. We're dealing with very large numbers of people. It is a big challenge. But let me be clear, as a final remark. We want to get this right. We want to do the right thing. I want people who need long-term ongoing support in the support group. This government has no interest in doing anything otherwise than looking after those who need it, but also giving encouragement and support and a bit of push to those who can get back into work, because I believe that's the right thing for them.
Order, order.